On the 9th of November 1918, amid the collapse of the Western Front and the outbreak of revolution in Berlin, the German Empire ceased to function as a sovereign monarchy. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the third and final emperor of a unified German Reich that had existed for less than half a century, crossed the border into neutral Netherlands, bringing an abrupt end to more than 500 years of Hohenzollern rule over Brandenburg and Prussia. What disappeared in that moment was not merely an imperial crown, but an entire constitutional architecture built around the divine right of kings, military obedience, and dynastic prestige. Yet, while the throne was permanently abolished, the family that sat upon it did not vanish from the pages of history. More than a century later, the question of where the heir to the last German Kaiser lives today carries far more depth than simple curiosity about palaces and aristocratic titles. Under the modern German constitution, noble titles possess no legal privileges. They survive merely as integral components of civil surnames. Therefore, identifying the last heir is not a search for an uncrowned monarch preparing to reclaim power, but an examination of how a former imperial dynasty transformed itself to navigate democratic institutions, property disputes, and the complex historical memory of 20th century Europe. The primary figure who stands at the center of this dynastic legacy today is Georg Friedrich, Prince of Prussia, Prinz von Preussen, the great-great-grandson of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Born in 1976 and educated in economics, he has served since 1994 as the head of the Royal Prussian House of Hohenzollern. Residing in Potsdam, the historic heartland of the Prussian monarchy just outside Berlin, his public life represents a unique bridge between historical preservation and private citizenship. To understand his current position, one must explore not just a geographical location, but the century-long transformation of imperial heirs into modern cultural custodians. 1. The collapse of 1918 and the flight to Dorn. To understand the modern standing of the Hohenzollern heirs, one must first revisit the catastrophic dissolution of the German Empire in the autumn of 1918. Kaiser Wilhelm II did not initially intend to abdicate. He envisioned retreating to the front lines or leading troops back to suppress civil unrest in Berlin. However, facing absolute military collapse and diplomatic isolation, Chancellor Prince Max of Baden announced the Kaiser's abdication without his prior consent to prevent an uncontrollable civil war. Stripped of imperial command, Wilhelm boarded a train to the Netherlands on November 10, 1918, seeking political asylum from Queen Wilhelmina. Wilhelm settled at Huis Doorn, a modest manor house in the Dutch province of Utrecht, where he lived in exile until his death in June 1941. From this remote Dutch residence, the former Kaiser maintained a strict court ceremonial, continuing to hold morning services and receiving monarchist visitors, but his political power was irrevocably destroyed. His formal instrument of abdication, signed on November 28, 1918, explicitly renounced his rights to both the imperial crown of Germany and the royal crown of Prussia, while releasing all imperial officers and soldiers from their oath of loyalty. The educational significance of this moment lies in the profound distinction between the end of political sovereignty and the survival of civil dynastic organization. The Weimar Constitution of August 1919 abolished all class distinctions, legal privileges, and nobility prerogatives across Germany. From that moment forward, titles such as Prinz or Herzog became part of a citizen's surname rather than indicators of political authority. For the Hohenzollerns, the exile in Dorn marked the beginning of a prolonged struggle to establish their identity as private citizens, who nevertheless carried the weight of centuries of statecraft. 2. Crown Prince Wilhelm and the turbulent Weimar years. While Kaiser Wilhelm II remained in Dutch exile, the question of leadership within Germany fell upon his eldest son, Crown Prince Wilhelm, 1882 and 1951. Having also fled to the Netherlands in November 1918, Crown Prince Wilhelm was interned on the island of Wieringen. Unlike his father, however, the younger Wilhelm was determined to return to German soil. In 1923, following political negotiations brokered by Chancellor Gustav Stresemann, the former Crown Prince received permission to return as a private citizen, settling at his residence, Sicilienhof Palace in Potsdam. The Weimar Republic did not immediately confiscate all royal assets without negotiation. In October 1926, the Prussian state parliament ratified a comprehensive property settlement with the House of Hohenzollern, Vermögens Auseinandersetzung. This landmark compromise divided the vast royal holdings. The newly founded state took ownership of major historic palaces, state archives, and vast public lands, while the Hohenzollern family retained dozens of private estates, residential castles, and substantial art collections. This legal settlement provided the family with financial autonomy throughout the interwar period. This historical phase highlights how traditional aristocracies attempt to maintain social influence when institutional power has been removed. Crown Prince Wilhelm attempted to navigate Republican politics, maintaining connections with conservative circles and nationalist movements in the hope of a constitutional monarchist restoration. However, this strategy ultimately exposed the dynasty to deep political vulnerability during the rise of totalitarianism in the 1930s, creating controversies that would continue to affect the family's legal standing nearly a century later. 3. World War II, expropriation, and post-war division. The catastrophe of the Second World War fundamentally fractured the material and geographical foundation of the Prussian dynasty. During the 1930s, members of the family had taken varying stances toward the National Socialist regime, ranging from ideological proximity in the pursuit of restoration to active distance and quiet opposition. The death of Prince Wilhelm, the eldest son of the Crown Prince, in the French campaign of 1940 prompted a massive public display of monarchist sentiment at his funeral in Potsdam, leading the regime to issue the Prinzenerlass, which prohibited members of former reigning houses from serving on active military front lines. When Nazi Germany collapsed in 1945, the historic ancestral heartland of Prussia, Brandenburg, Pomerania, Silesia, and East Prussia, was occupied by Soviet forces, or annexed. Under the Soviet military administration in Germany, SMAD, sweeping land reforms were implemented between 1945 and 1949. All private agricultural properties exceeding 100 hectares, along with palaces, manor houses, and art collections within the Soviet occupation zone, were expropriated without compensation. Sicilienhof Palace in Potsdam, where the historic 1945 Allied Conference was held, was permanently seized and nationalized. Consequently, the Hohenzollerns found themselves completely uprooted from the Prussian soil they had governed since 1415. Crown Prince Wilhelm died in Hickingen, Baden-Württemberg in 1951. His successor as head of the family, Prince Louis Ferdinand, 1907-1994, was forced to re-establish the family's presence in West Germany, primarily living in Bremen and near the ancestral Hohenzollern Castle in southwestern Germany. The Cold War division meant that for more than 4 decades, the heirs of the Kaiser were physically severed from their historical palaces in Berlin and Brandenburg. 4. Succession rules and dynastic settlements. The internal lineage of the House of Hohenzollern is governed by traditional house laws, Hausgesetze, that date back centuries, established under the principles of agnatic primogeniture and equal marriage, Ebenbürtigkeit. Under these historical rules, headship of the royal house passes to the eldest surviving legitimate son born of an equal dynastic union. However, applying 18th century house laws within a modern 20th century democratic society generated significant legal and familial tension. When Prince Louis Ferdinand served as head of the house from 1951 to 1994, several of his elder sons contracted marriages with women from non-royal backgrounds, renouncing their dynastic succession claims under the house statutes. His third son, Prince Louis Ferdinand Jr., 1944-1977, who married Countess Donata of Castel-Rudenhausen, a member of a recognized mediatized noble house, was designated as the dynastic heir. However, Prince Louis Ferdinand Jr. died tragically in a military training accident in 1977, leaving behind a 1-year-old son, Georg Friedrich. When the elder Prince Louis Ferdinand passed away in 1994, the 18-year-old Georg Friedrich became the sole head of the Prussian royal house, chef de houses Hohenzollern. Several disinherited relatives challenged the validity of the ancestral house laws in German civil courts, arguing that marriage-based inheritance restrictions violated modern public policy. In a landmark 2004 ruling, the Federal Court of Justice, Bundesgerichtshof, clarified the legal boundaries. While civil property inheritance is subject to German civil law, a private family association or house may determine its own symbolic headship, according to historical traditions. Georg Friedrich was confirmed in his position, demonstrating the clear distinction between civil property rights and internal dynastic representation. 5. Who is Georg Friedrich, Prince of Prussia? Born on June 10, 1976, in Bremen, Georg Friedrich grew up in West Germany with an acute awareness of his dual existence as an ordinary citizen and the bearer of a historic lineage. He completed his secondary education at Glenelmon College in Scotland and subsequently fulfilled his mandatory military service in the German Bundeswehr, serving as an Army Mountain Infantry soldier, Gebirgsjäger. He then pursued a university degree in business economics, Betriebswirtschaftslehre, at the Technische Universität Bergakademie Freiburg in Saxony. Rather than relying purely on family heritage, Georg Friedrich built a professional career in the private sector. He has worked in business consultancy, intellectual property management, and technology transfer, assisting universities and private enterprises in commercializing research innovations. Additionally, he manages various family business interests, including historical licensing, forestry management, and regional commercial ventures. In August 2011, Georg Friedrich married Princess Sophie of Eisenberg in a ceremony held at the Church of Peace, Friedenskirche, in Potsdam, which received international media coverage as a significant cultural event for the region. The couple has 4 children, twin sons born in 2013, Prince Karl Friedrich and Prince Louis Ferdinand, a daughter born in 2015, and another son born in 2016. In modern German life, Georg Friedrich operates not as a claimant to an imperial throne, but as a corporate manager and cultural administrator dedicated to family heritage preservation. 6. Where is he living today? Potsdam and Burg Hohenzollern. Geographically, Georg Friedrich and his immediate family have chosen to center their lives in the historic cultural landscape of Potsdam, the historic royal seat of the Prussian monarchs in Brandenburg. Following the reunification of Germany in 1990, the family gradually reestablished its presence in the Berlin-Brandenburg metropolitan region, allowing them to participate directly in local civic and cultural initiatives. Alongside their residence in Potsdam, the primary material anchor of the dynasty remains Burg Hohenzollern, a majestic hilltop fortress situated near Heckingen in the state of Baden-Württemberg. Perched atop Mount Hohenzollern at an elevation of 855 meters, the castle has been the ancestral seat of the dynasty since the 11th century. Reconstructed in the 19th century in the neo-Gothic style by King Frederick William IV of Prussia, the castle remains private property. Historically shared between the Prussian and Swabian Catholic lines of the family, Georg Friedrich acquired sole ownership of Burg Hohenzollern in 2026, consolidating the management of the fortress. Burg Hohenzollern is not maintained as a closed private fortress. It operates as a major public museum and cultural heritage site, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. It houses historic artifacts, including the Prussian royal crown of 1888, personal memorabilia of Frederick the Great, and significant historical archives. The residence and administrative focus in Potsdam and Swabia symbolize the transformation of imperial real estate into cultural infrastructure. 7. The legal restitution debate and the 2025 resolution. Following German reunification in 1990, the German federal government passed the Compensation Act, Ausgleichsleistungsgesetz, allowing individuals and families whose assets had been expropriated under Soviet occupation, 1945-1949, to seek compensation or restitution for movable cultural property, such as artworks, books, and archives. However, the law contained a critical exclusion. Compensation is denied if the original owner or their family significantly aided, erheblichen Vorschub geleistet, the National Socialist regime in establishing or maintaining power. Starting in 2014, Georg Friedrich, acting on behalf of the family, entered into confidential negotiations with the German federal government, the state of Berlin, and the state of Brandenburg regarding tens of thousands of artworks, historic furnishings, and museum pieces that had been transferred to public museums after 1945. When these negotiations became public in 2019, they sparked intense national debate among historians, politicians, and the public regarding the role of Crown Prince Wilhelm during the Weimar Republic. Renowned historians presented competing expert opinions on whether the Crown Prince had provided substantial political support to the regime. Recognizing that prolonged litigation would damage public trust in cultural institutions, Georg Friedrich formally withdrew several lawsuits in 2023. This paved the way for a historic resolution finalized in mid-2025. Under this comprehensive agreement, the vast majority of contested artifacts, totaling approximately 27,000 historic objects, were permanently secured for public display through the creation of the Stiftung Hohenzollernscher Kunstbesitz, Foundation of Hohenzollern Art Property, governed jointly by public authorities and family representatives. This compromise brought an end to nearly a century of property disputes, ensuring that historical collections remain accessible to the public in German museums. 8. Monarchy, memory, and modern German identity. The current situation of the Kaiser's heir reflects the mature democratic relationship modern Germany maintains with its past. Unlike nations with reigning constitutional monarchies, such as the United Kingdom or the Netherlands, Germany is a federal parliamentary republic, where the concept of a restoration is absent from mainstream political life. Monarchist organizations exist only as small, marginal associations with no political representation or public demand. Georg Friedrich himself has consistently stated in interviews that he has no political ambitions to restore the monarchy, explicitly supporting the democratic order of the Federal Republic of Germany. His public responsibilities center on cultural foundations, philanthropic endeavors, such as the Princess Kira of Prussia Foundation, which supports youth and educational initiatives, and the preservation of historic monuments. This dynamic illustrates how former imperial families in 21st century Europe function as stewards of collective cultural memory rather than political claimants. The palaces of Sanssouci, Charlottenburg, and Sicilienhof are no longer seats of dynastic authority. but UNESCO World Heritage Sites and public museums that narrate the complex, multi-layered history of Prussia and Germany, from the Enlightenment and European statecraft to militarism, collapse, and democratic renewal. Conclusion. When answering the question of where the heir of the last German Kaiser lives today, the answer is both straightforward and historically profound. Georg Friedrich, Prince of Prussia, resides primarily in Potsdam, near Berlin, while actively managing the ancestral Hohenzollern Castle in Baden-Württemberg. Yet, his daily reality is far removed from the imperial splendor that surrounded Kaiser Wilhelm II prior to 1918. He lives as a private German citizen, an economist, and a cultural manager whose legal and social identity is defined by the democratic framework of the Federal Republic. The journey of the House of Hohenzollern over the past century provides a compelling case study in the evolution of European dynasties, from imperial autocracy and wartime exile to the loss of properties under division and the modern resolution of cultural disputes. The heirs of the Kaiser have shifted from ruling a nation to preserving its material memory. The crown and palaces now belong to the public domain of history, while the family represents a living link to a bygone era. If you enjoyed this deep dive into dynastic history and the modern lives of former royal heirs, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for future documentary investigations. We would love to hear from you. Which historical dynasty should we investigate next? Let us know in the comments below and tell us which city or country you're watching from today.